Hello, welcome to the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. I am your host, Roy Kessel, and today we are very excited to have with us a special guest. We have Sarah Hillyer. Sarah is the director at the University of Tennessee of the Center for Sports, Peace, and Society. And Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Roy. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're excited to learn more about the great work that you're doing down there. I know it's been a crazy year for everybody coming off of COVID, but the work never stops, and society moves on, sports philanthropy moves on, and certainly the need for peace in today's world is something that's crucial. I know we're going to spend a lot of the focus on that work that you're doing now at the University of Tennessee, but I really want to back up a little bit to your childhood and learn where you got the passion for sports.
I love it. Backing up to childhood. Okay, so I always say that I am one of the luckiest kids in the world. I was a young girl that grew up on the heels of Title IX, and I was always aware of it because I had amazing parents who were keenly tuned into this policy and the opportunities that it was going to provide their new bouncing baby little girl. So I guess the typical socialization of a young girl, everything I had was pink. My grandmother and mother would give me baby dolls. But from a really young age, the dolls did not interest me. And to my grandmother and mother's horror, they came into my room. I don't know, I was probably 4 or 5 years old, came into my room. I had a cardboard box, a pair of scissors, and all of my dolls. And I was popping the heads off of the dolls and cutting their hair off so there would be different shapes of balls. And then I could throw them or kick them or shoot them or whatever. So my parents knew from an early age that I absolutely loved playing and ball sports, and that led to the pursuit of, I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, 800 people. So there weren't much other things to do. So our family played, and we played basketball and baseball and American football. And I played all of those sports growing up in sports leagues with boys because there just weren't girls playing much, even though we were in the years of Title IX coming into the fore. So sports was a huge part of our family's culture and identity. And I was blessed to have a dad that let me play everything and encouraged me to play everything and played everything with me.
Well, that's a great story, because you look at so many kids growing up today and the level of expectation and specialization from such an early age. And we've seen the data on how that impacts burnout, how it impacts repetitive use injuries, and some of the mental health challenges because of the pressure of having your entire identity rolled up into one sport that maybe you just don't progress quickly enough to be good at, right? And so tell us what sports you enjoyed the most when you were growing up.
Well, I loved them all equally. And I would say during basketball season, I loved baseball more. During baseball, I loved basketball more. But it was just constant. And, I got to a point, I was probably, I don't know, between 10 and 12 years old. And I remember my dad, we were outside playing one-on-one basketball that day. And we took a water break, and he sat me down and he said, "Hey, Sarah, there's this new thing regarding Title IX. And the opportunity is that you could get a really good college education paid for in exchange for working a job in a sport that you love. And so if you would like playing a sport for your job that would pay for an education, perhaps at a school better than what we could afford as a family, would you be interested?" Well, this was a crazy conversation to have as a 10-year-old, right? With your dad. We're sitting down like in a business meeting, planning out the future. But what was so beautiful about that is, of course, as a 10-year-old sports lover, I said, of course, I would love to have a job playing a sport to pay for my school. So my dad said, okay, if that's the case, it's okay if you continue to play all the sports that you love, but we might need to start to spend a little more time and energy on focusing on one if that's going to be your pursuit, not to the dismissal of the others, but maybe just a little more emphasis. And the most beautiful thing as a young daughter having this conversation with a father in the 1970s was my dad then turned it and said, okay, you love football, American football, you love baseball, and you love basketball. Which one do you think you might want to pursue and focus on the most? And the power of having that choice, you know, it was an easy choice for a dad that knows better that women's basketball needs to be, it's going to be my greatest shot, not baseball with the boys or American football. But he didn't steer me in that direction. He gave me the agency and the opportunity to make that choice. Luckily, I picked basketball. So that was a really long-winded answer, but I think it's so important to celebrate the roles of our fathers and the ways that they are supporting daughters in pursuit of their dreams as athletes.
Well, I love that story that he involved you from such an early age, because too frequently, right, we see parents, for lack of a better term, imposing those decisions on their kids and not really having them be part of it. And it's interesting because what I really latched onto from your comment there was the fact that during basketball season, baseball was your favorite sport, and during baseball season, basketball was your favorite sport. And in part, I think that goes back to the whole concept of play, because when you're in that hyper structured environment with the sport, with all of the coaching, then you tend to feel the pressure. You have that structure there, and it doesn't feel like you're enjoying and playing in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much to think about with that. And I felt that way all the way through high school, which I guess segues us into maybe that next chapter. So I did dig into basketball more and was really, really fortunate and blessed to earn a basketball scholarship to Virginia Tech, and which indeed was an education probably far better than the local options that we would have had in Kentucky. And my parents were wonderful and made so many sacrifices, but to be able to have the opportunity to pursue education at a place like Virginia Tech was an incredible gift that sport provided to me. And I say often that sport and education opened the world. It became a passport or a visa to the world to me. And I'm so grateful for the intersection of sport and education in my life.
Well, it's amazing that you were involved, really, as you said, from the early stages of Title IX, and getting the benefits there and getting the opportunity. So now you went to Virginia Tech. You're playing basketball. What were you studying while you were there?
Sports management. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So that must have been one of the earlier sports management programs that were out there, because it's a relatively recent phenomenon to have such array of sports marketing, sports management programs.
Yep, you're exactly right. It was early on, but I knew at that point the power of sport in my own life, the doors that it opened that otherwise perhaps would have been unavailable to me. And if I could find a career doing something to advance the way sport is used to give kids like me opportunities, that was a career path that I envisioned. I also envisioned coaching just because of the wonderful coaches and the positive influence that they had in my life. And so I think a pursuit of coaching was also in the works at that early stage of studying.
Yeah, coaching, as you said, has such an impact on kids and on athletes. We often take for granted what that is, but from such an early age, when you go back and listen to former professional athletes talk about who impacted them the most, right? It's rarely their pro coaches.
Yeah.
I mean, even though they impacted them, but it's rarely a formative type of impact. Um, the college coaches occasionally, but most frequently, right, you hear about the youth and high school coaches, and somebody who figuratively, or in those days, literally grabbed them by the back of the shirt and pulled them back in line and kept them on track and really made a difference in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it was also a physical education teacher. So I was at Bald Knob Elementary School in this town of 800. I mean, there was nothing. And I had a PE teacher that saw my love for basketball and sports. And there was I don't know if you remember this, Roy, but there was the Elks hoop shoot contest. Do you remember those?
I do.
So civic organization, the Elks organization, and they had like a nationwide free throw competition for years for kids, which is kind of crazy to think about now. And so the Elks hoop shoot competition was coming to Frankfurt, the larger town where we were on the rural edges of. And my PE teacher said, "Hey, Sarah, would you like to enter this free throw competition?" I was 8 years old. I wasn't even strong enough to get the ball to the basket. And so he taught me how to shoot granny style, like and so
Rick
every
Barrett.
morning before school started, right? So 8 years old, 6:30 a.m., my PE teacher would meet me in the gym to work on my free throws, granny style. We'd shoot 100 free throws before school started. And we did that for weeks. And when I look back on it, for then it was just normal. It was just, he was like, my PE teacher was just a friend that I played with, But looking back, for a physical education teacher to get up early to go meet a young girl and any other kids that wanted to come and play and be a part of the competition at 6:30 in the morning, there was no reward for him, right? I mean, there was no prestige for someone to win an Elks hoop shoot contest, but it was that selflessness of seeing the power that sport can play in a young person's life that I respect and appreciate so much.
Yeah, you hit on a key point, right? Which is, it's not always about the fame or the accolades or anything else, right? Somebody like this PE teacher that you had, they recognized the glimmer of light, right? The ray of sunshine in Sarah, and they looked at that and said, "Here's somebody who really has a passion and energy for doing something, and I'm in a position to help her." And
Yeah.
I'm in a position to teach her, and the satisfaction is internal. It's not about saying, I'm the best granny style free throw shooting coach in the country.
It's so true, right? And he wasn't going to get a shoe deal, and he wasn't going to get, an AAU position, and he wasn't going to get promoted in our little element. You're right. It was for the intrinsic of just investing in human lives, which I think is sadly, as you well know, lost in youth sports today because it's so hyper commercialized. And now we have sport is a means to an end, whether that's financial or social status or those things. It's not for the purity of what sport can provide as far as shaping amazing citizens and responsible, loving human beings.
Well, and that's what makes this space interesting, is there's so many different ways to accomplish that. So you went through playing basketball at Virginia Tech and studying sports management, and tell us a little bit about the early part of your career.
Yeah, well, this part will go to Virginia Tech because this is there was a crossroads. So when I got to Virginia Tech, I quickly realized, and again, this is just based on my personal experience, but I quickly realized that if we look at the mission statement of the NCAA or Division I sports and athletics, I guess on paper it says that the NCAA exists for the holistic development of student athletes. And that was not my experience. I quickly realized that basketball at a school the size of Virginia Tech, it truly is a business. It is a job for a coach, and that coach has to keep her job and will essentially do anything to do that. And this was my experience, like I said. So I had a coach that used all those old school psychological tricks and controls and things like that. And for her, in my life, it was all about how much I weighed. And so every single morning at 5 a.m., the athletic trainer would call me and tell me it was time to come weigh in. And so I would go to the training room, weigh in, which is unusual for basketball. It's not really a sport that we weigh in every day at 5 a.m. for, but I could have seen it. What I couldn't see was every single day, the number that I needed to weigh changed. So there was no consistency. So maybe one day it was 140. And then the next day, arbitrarily, without any warning, the trainer would look on her list and she would say, oh, today you need to weigh 138. And then the next day it might be 142. So it stripped all control, because I never even knew what I was aiming for, what that target was. So if I didn't make weight in the morning, I could weigh in again at 2 in the afternoon, either before afternoon practice or pregame meal if it was a game night. So on the days that I didn't make weight in the morning, I would skip classes. I'd go put on garbage bags and go to the student rec center and bike and get on the treadmill all day to make weight when I went back. And obviously I didn't eat anything all day either. So in the evenings, I would have, in some cases, been training all day, had practice or a game. And it was weird because I wasn't like I wasn't playing or there. I mean, I was, as a freshman, 6th woman off the bench. So I was contributing. There wasn't this, oh, I'm trying to weed out this player that's eating up a scholarship that's not contributing to the team. I was contributing. I think, if I remember correctly, I led the conference. At that time, it was the Metro Conference in 3-point goals for the year. And I think broke the record for number of 3-point shots made. So there was a disconnect, right, between the performance and what was happening. But I would, at the end of the day, I would eat everything I could at night because I was so starving from playing all day. But sadly, because I knew the process would start over again, and I'm sorry to be so crass, but then I would throw everything up, knowing that the cycle would start over. And after several months of that, now I was in this habitual pattern, which led to undiagnosed, but certainly I had all the symptoms of bulimia. So after 2 years, I transferred because I was really scared that I was not going to get my life back or be able to be quote unquote normal again. And I had a completely different view and experience of what sport meant in my life at that point.
So where did you transfer to?
I transferred to Liberty University, right next door in Lynchburg. And that was a very personal decision in the sense that for me to feel like I could get my life back on track, I grew up in a family that did not go to church, but we had a deep faith perspective, a deep faith. I'm a follower of Christ, not religion. So for me, it was important to go to a place where I could dig back into the Bible, that I believe my identity is in God and in my relationship with Christ. My identity was not a basketball player. I had to realize basketball is what I do. It's not who I am. And I needed to get in a environment that reminded me of who I am and that my purpose in life is much bigger than being an athlete.
Well, and I think when you talk about that purpose, it's really important. And one of the things that's terrifying to me, I should say, is when you hear stories like you just expressed, where there's somebody, there's no other term for it other than abuse,
Mhm.
where they're taking women that are college athletes and putting them through things you've heard in some fashion, maybe not with in your case with the physical touch, but the victims of Larry Nasser and other
Absolutely.
types of abuse where they were put in rooms and told that they're too fat or that they're not coming out until um, they reach a certain weight. And one of the ways he was able to gain favor and trust from these young athletes was that he would sneak them food or candy bars because their coaches were telling them like you're too fat. You've got to go sit in that room and you can't eat until you make that weight. And
That's
it's
right.
just horrific when you hear those stories. And as you said, I think the frustration has to be when you don't have control and you don't have a target, right? It's like somebody just threw a dart at the board in the morning and picked a weight. So what happened if you were under? Does that mean you have to go eat donuts for 4 hours until you could get your weight up to 142?
No, no, it was, then you're good. It was, yeah, and people ask me today, have I ever confronted that coach or, you know, and I never did. But to be honest, at this stage, as as weird as this sounds, I am so grateful that I went through that experience, because first of all, it shaped and gave me direction for a future for the work that I do now. I don't know that I would have come to where I am now and created what we've created had I not gone through that experience. But it also allows me to have not just empathy, but sympathy for student athletes, and to have a keen awareness that there's a lot more happening below the surface in most cases, right? Whether it's,
No doubt.
and so I'm grateful to be able to connect with student athletes and professional athletes and former athletes on this level, because I think sadly, it is the norm rather than the exception to experience something similar to this. Again, in our pursuit of this hyper commercialization of the way that sport has been hijacked for things that are not as pure as I would love for them to be.
Yeah, and that purity certainly, you go back to the original Olympic ideals of what sport should be, and then for how many years that amateurism model um, has been a symbol of purity, and yet at the same time, we look at the IOC over the years, you look at the NCAA issues now, and that amateurism ideal has been one of the biggest sources of conflict and trouble in both of those organizations over the years. So I want to jump ahead now to the great work that you're doing at the University of Tennessee and want to learn more about how that came to be and what you've been building there.
Well, thank you. So I graduated from Liberty with a degree in sports administration. When I graduated, I'll never forget this. I walked across the stage, I got my diploma, and rather than going and sitting back down with my classmates, I just walked straight up the stadium stairs, got in my parents' car, and we drove 8 hours home to Kentucky. And at that point, I still didn't have a handle on my struggle with food and eating. And I was in a really dangerous cycle that I couldn't dig myself out of. So for the next year, my parents spent just letting me live at home and love me through it, and just allowed me to be patient. But I said to my parents on that drive home, Mom and Dad, I know I have a degree in sports administration, but I will never, ever, ever have anything to do with sports again the rest of my life. I'm not, I'm done. And so they
Well,
were
we're
so
glad that
kind.
you didn't stick to that because you've added a lot of valuable work. And so we're very
Well,
happy that that changed.
yes, yes. So they said, whatever it is that you need, we'll get through it. So I'll remember that that year where I was just spent kind of getting my feet under me again. I had one of those, the clouds parted, you know, the angels descended. Not really, I'm being silly, but I did have one of those epiphanies, and it was this. And Roy, this will seem so obvious to you and I now, but I was not healthy enough to realize this. The epiphany was, wait a minute, Sarah, sport did not do this to you. Basketball did not do this to you. It's what someone in a position of power did. It is how she chose to use sport in your life. And if she had the power to take away your dignity and your confidence and all of that, Sarah, you have the same power, you have the same agency to give that to people. So like, get yourself up, you know, shake it off and do something with this. And so that's what I did. So in 1994, I started an organization, and this will sound familiar, called Sport for Peace. And the idea was to work with student athletes, former student athletes, coaches, parents, to help use sport as a very intentional tool to help us find inner peace, to understand who we are and the value that we can add to the world as athletes because of the unique skills and the ways that we see the world and the things that we can offer. So it was sport for peace, internal peace, but then it was sport for peace, connecting with people, understanding that the sense of community, the sense of belonging, the things that we can connect as far as the universal languages. So when I started this nonprofit, I just started taking sports teams and not from one university, but just a hodgepodge of student athletes to different countries. And we would just do and go and do friendly tours in China or Mexico or Brazil. And then it opened up to the Middle East, and we were getting invitations from Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and places where women's sports was 30 or 40 or 50 years behind where we were. And it gave me such a keen appreciation, again, for Title IX and the opportunities to have women's sports. So I did that for 15 years, Roy, in the nonprofit world. And I spent 10 years of that in Iran, at least 1 month every year, helping to develop their women's sports system. And I was doing this with a dear partner organization that I had so much respect for. But while I was there and I'm watching, they had me introduce fast pitch women's softball to Iran. Like, what are the chances of that? So in the history of the Persian people, they had never seen softball, heard about softball, anything. So we started from scratch and we built a softball league from absolutely nothing. There are 17 women's softball teams in Iran playing even today. And that work started in 1999. So all that to say, when I was there, I thought, okay, I can't keep funding all of this kind of work. The scale and the scope of it has grown far beyond bake sales and car washes, which is how I funded it for 15 years. I really need to further my education and figure out how to write grants and how to do research so that when I come home from places like Iran or Iraq or places like that, I have more than anecdotal evidence. So literally, Roy, in 2006, I was almost 40 years old. I did a Google search for PhDs in sport sociology because I had already had a master's in sport psychology. So sociology was what I was lacking. And 2 programs pulled up: Ball State University in Indiana and the University of Tennessee. Well, I applied, ended up here at UT, did 4 years of my PhD in sports sociology with every intention of going back to the nonprofit work that I was doing, but just armed with a different skill set. Again, the ability to write a grant and the ability to do research. But while I was here and working with student athletes, and I was teaching, doing graduate assistant teaching and so on, I had another one of those epiphanies, and it was, wait a minute, I could go back to the nonprofit world, or I can stay within higher education and begin to try to disrupt the way we teach sport-related disciplines, whether it be sport management, journalism, kinesiology, all of that, to make sure that students studying sport-related disciplines now don't graduate without understanding that sport as a tool for social impact should be foundational and critical to what we're doing as we go out into the world, as we're training the next generation of those working in the sport industry, and not just one tiny chapter or module in a 4-year degree. And that's how I ended up here. Is I wrote a little proposal, gave it to our dean and our chancellor and our provost to say, what do you all think if we start a center that is dedicated to the intersection of sport, peace building, improving our societies at the intersection of sport and education? And that was it. 2012, we launched the center.
So the center's been going now. You're coming up on a 10th anniversary next year, so it's exciting. What do you have planned for the celebration?
Oh, it's such a great question. So not only is it the 10-year anniversary of our center, it's a 10-year anniversary of our relationship with the U.S. Department of State and ESPNW and the global sports mentoring program that we've created and implemented in partnership with ESPNW and the State Department. So there's 2 10-year anniversaries. But the beautiful thing about this is, Roy, guess what next year also is? You know this. It's the 50th anniversary of Title IX. So the collusion, like the collision of just my own story and understanding the value of Title IX and the role that it played in my life with a 10-year anniversary of the work that we're doing here at the University of Tennessee. So we are celebrating by embarking on a giant 50th anniversary Title IX storytelling project that has a podcast series. We'll be publishing a book that will come out, lots and lots of research. So we have mapped all of the gender policies that affect women in sports in about 62 countries. We've mapped that so we can directly tie policies to gender equality and the women's sports movement around the world. And our take on celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX and the 10 years of work at the center really will focus on what is the global ripple effect of this US-based legislation, and how are we making sure that the responsibility and the privilege we have of 50 years of Title IX, that we're making sure that our sports sisters around the world have the tools and resources and networks they need to expedite their own gender equality journeys.
Well, it's an amazing, as you said, confluence of events to bring all of that together to make sure that you have the ability to celebrate, the ESPNW, the State Department, the mentoring program, Title IX. That's a great opportunity, and we look forward to helping spread the word of that and share and incorporate that into our programming over the next year, because it's really, as you said, a milestone that had impact not only on college sports, which is really where it started, right, but really on all sports at all levels, going down to the youth sports level, to the professional level, and certainly well outside of the United States, as you know. And so it's really a great opportunity. So in addition to that, tell us a little bit more about the center and the types of people that come into your program, and then what elements exist within the program in terms of how people focus their studies going through the center.
Yep. It's a great question. So if I give our academic mission statement, we use the power of sport, education, and social innovation, specifically to create a more equitable, inclusive, and peaceful world. So everything we're doing is at those intersections: sport, education, innovation, or entrepreneurship, to create a more inclusive, equitable, and peaceful world. And so the way it looks here is that the large bulk of our activity for the last 10 years has really been to educate men and women around the world. So we're not necessarily working within the university system per se, although we are, but it is how can we make access to education and social impact and sport accessible to men and women, emerging leaders around the world that are using sport to create and to impact their local communities. And the reason for that is really because immediately when we started, we received the grant from the U.S. Department of State 6 days after we launched. And so it's really become a huge part of our identity, is working side by side with the State Department and their sports diplomacy division to really build out a global mentoring program to equip and empower the next generation of social change makers using sport around the world. And so while most of our programming is outside of Knoxville and off campus, what we have done is that we've connected all of that global work and impact to our students here through internships, mentorships, sponsorships, programs, so that our students are taking the theoretical information that they're learning in the classroom in their respective degree programs, and then they come and work with the center, and they're moving that theoretical knowledge into real world practical knowledge of, okay, how do I apply what I'm learning in the classroom to doing work that actually moves the needle in advancing social justice through the power of sport and education.
Well, you're touching on so many important areas there, and I love the fact that you're with the mentorship program, but also that you're getting the students involved and getting them involved in the sponsorships and in the social justice and all of those critical areas. And I have to commend you for getting a grant 6 days after you launched, because I know most organizations feel like they have to apply for the same grant at least 6 times before they even get proper consideration. So tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Yes, we feel blessed. I think it was the call for applications came out before we were even approved here at the center. And when the call for applications came out, at the time it was called Empowering Women and Girls Through Sports. And that particular RFP, request for proposals, was as if someone had written it knowing exactly what I had been doing for the past 15 years in the nonprofit world, working to empower women and girls in many, many, many marginalized countries and communities. So for us to write the proposal for that was like writing an autobiography. And so I just think it was a perfect storm of an opportunity that came about after years and years and years of having the dream to scale the work that we were doing, knowing the potential that existed. So.
Well, that's great that you get that opportunity. You often hear people say that sometimes they don't feel that the RFPs are truly open because they have been scripted for a particular organization, right?
Well,
they've got to put it out as an open proposal.
you know,
But that's great that you have that opportunity and you have that vision, and it shows how much that was needed at that time and still needed today as you talk about the work you do all over the world. Somebody this morning was talking about the goal of a nonprofit is to put itself out of business by
you better
solving the
believe it.
problem. Right. And unfortunately, we're nowhere close to solving these problems that we're dealing with in sports and everything we look at Sports Philanthropy Network and everything you're doing at the center. Long way from solving it. I think we're making amazing progress. You've done incredible work and your reach expands and continues to expand. And we look forward to helping you accomplish that goal. So I want to thank you for coming on with us and sharing all of your story and information so that more people can learn about it. So if people want more specifics about the center or want to reach out with ideas or possible collaborations or anything that's going on, tell them how they would best reach you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to reach me. So if you just use my first and last name, Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, Hillyer, H-I-L-L-Y-E-R on LinkedIn. But then also Sport and Peace, utk.edu. I wouldn't say the website tells too beautiful of a story, but it certainly is a place that you could track us down. but LinkedIn. And we always say at the center that as academics, we take our copywriting so seriously. We're really serious about copywriting everything we do. And Roy, you can see my facial expression, very tongue in cheek. What we mean by that is anyone has the right to copy anything we produce or anything we do if they promise to do that in the name of advancing social good through the power of sport. And so if anybody wants to reach out, we are an open book. We believe social change is a team sport. Is not an individual sport. And so with that, we're always happy to collaborate and partner and are so grateful for you. We know you share the same mindset. So I think we see ourselves as changing the world one high five at a time, and that social change is a team sport, and anybody has the right to copy what we do and how we've done it in order to advance the cause together.
Well, you've created a lot of resources, and we'll make sure that those pages are linked and all of your information is listed on the podcast episode page for everybody that's listening. If you go on our website, you'll be able to see more specifics about Sarah and her background and about the center and the work that they're doing with links there. And you'll be able to, as Sarah said, share in those resources that they've developed and that they continue to develop. And follow the progress of that amazing work. So again, Sarah, thank you for being on with us today. But before we let you go, we want to take a minute, and we're going to use our sports philanthropy superpowers, and we're going to wave our magic wand. And we want to use those powers, as you said, for good. And we're going to appoint you as commissioner of a sport. So tell us what sport you would like to be in charge of.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Sport I would like to be in charge of. Well, it may be too obvious, but with everything that happened with basketball and the NCAA, I'd probably want to be commissioner of basketball and help. I would love to use that power to help the NCAA, all of its member organizations, to remember that we are in service to the student athlete, not the student athlete is in service to our careers, our own personal goals, our egos, our business desires, that we are absolutely in service to student athletes. And student athletes are fragile, young, developing humans that have the potential to make incredible contributions to this world if they're given the support and the tools and the resources and the respect that they so deserve. And so I just want to remind us of that. We get lost so much in the business and the bottom line and all of those things, and it removes us so far from the humanity of what we all got into this work for, or why we all fell in love with sport to begin with. So I just love to, as commissioner, take it back to the basics and remind us that this is about transforming human lives and doing it in pursuit of something that is so much bigger and better than ourselves.
Well, you're doing an amazing job, and we're excited to continue to follow that progress and collaborate with you to expand that reach and hopefully make even a greater impact. I know you're doing incredible work and have amazing support from the U.S. State Department, ESPNW, and others. So congratulations on all of that. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Roy, thank you so much, and high fives to you. You are a blessing to this industry, and I'm so incredibly proud of your work and honored to partner with you anytime. So thank you so much.
And to all of our viewers and listeners, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. This is your host, Roy Kessel, signing off. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. Please remember to live generously. Thank you.